Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Esper, for your service, for you being here. Thank you to your family for their support, for your service. I appreciate all the work that we've done since I've been in the Senate and the time we spent the other day talking about your nomination. We have talked, and you have mentioned several times, I think in almost every question, a commitment to the NDS. And I think we all are committed to this. I think my question, though, involves how often should we be looking at the NDS? How should we tweak it? For instance, we have pulled out of the JCPOA. We've seen Iran now enriching uranium. Clearly, one would argue, on a path toward nuclear arms. So how often do we look at that? And what adjustments, do you know of any adjustments that need to be made now? And particularly if, in fact, we have a nuclear-armed Iran, how would that affect implementation of the NDS?
I think strategy should be reviewed constantly and certainly referred to constantly. And as events change, you need to adapt your strategy to the world that you live in. So I think it's a continuous, ongoing process. There's nothing in the world right now that jumps out to me that says we need to change. You know, while the NDS speaks about Russia and China as strategic competitors in this era of great power competition, it also explicitly cites the fact that we have to deal in the meantime with regional challenges such as Iran and North Korea and others.
Well, as you look forward, though, clearly we're seeing Iran on a path with their nuclear program. Are there things that we need to be doing now that we need to prepare to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear arms?
I do think we need to get back into a negotiated path with them, preferably an updated version of JCPOA, if you will, that addresses with finality a verifiable, irreversible, and permanent prohibition on their nuclear work and efforts. So that'd be number one. And then we also need to address the means to deliver them, ICBMs. So to me, those are two things, at least two things in a modified JCPOA that we would want to address. And I don't think, you know, as you look across all the countries, even those who supported JCPOA 1, that people would agree that we do not need Iran to go down that path. It's just it's bad for the region, and it's bad for the continent of Europe as well.
All right, thank you. I want to get back to also the discussion we've had about alliances. Everybody understands the alliances and how important there is, but it's easier to say and talk about in a hearing than to do. And clearly Russia, China, Iran, everyone is trying to threaten our alliances, to break up our alliances. That's pretty obvious from whether it is what China is doing in the Belt and Roads Initiative to what China is doing, particularly in Turkey. My question, though, is, you know, what can we do better? Because it seems to me that some of our government's own actions is also undermining those alliances. We got trade policies where we're fighting with our friends. We've got, which is giving them the opportunity to talk to China. We've got the president often undermines his own intelligence, folks, by saying this whole Russian interference is fake news and a hoax, and cozying up, and that's a term that gets used often to the leader of North Korea, the leader of Russia, the leader and others. What are we doing wrong in terms of that? And can't we also undermine those alliances by the actions of the government? And what would you suggest we do different?
Well, I think, first of all, from a DOD perspective, we need to keep doing now what we're doing well. I've had the chance on many occasions in the past 2 years as Secretary of the Army to visit our Joint Maneuver Center at Hohenfels, Germany, where we train all of our allies together, fighting against a notional Russian threat, if you will. So we need to sustain those things. And by the way, that was a big change from when I last served in Italy in the early 1990s. So we need to sustain those things. And then I will tell you, when I attended the Defense Ministerial in Brussels about 2.5, 3 weeks ago now as acting secretary, we were having very honest, very candid discussions, thinking ahead on any number of things by which we could improve the alliance in terms of its readiness. We talked about what's called the 4x30s initiative. It was an idea by General Mattis where we had 30 squadrons, 30 surface combatants, and 30 brigades ready within 30 days. And we were taking that seriously in terms of how we developed that. We talked a lot about 5G. How do we make sure that we keep 5G and Huawei out of our networks? And so the alliance is really looking forward. I think they have a great leader we have in Jens Stoltenberg.
Well, Mr. Secretary, let me just ask you this question, though. When the President does some things, are you willing to stand up and say, Mr. President, your actions may be undermining our ability to strengthen these alliances? Can you do that?
My commitment to all of you is that I will always give the President or all of you my candid, honest advice, what I think is the right course of action.
And I believe your commitment, sir. I appreciate your time and effort, and I look forward to your confirmation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for all of your service and to your family. It's tremendous. And by the way, sacrificial service. And I know that throughout that service, I'm sure you've faced people who've disagreed with your line of work, have probably even been hostile at times. I'm sorry it had to happen in this committee, and just know that, as you can tell, by and large, we're not here to question your integrity. That's already been well established by lots of people. I appreciated both in your opening statement and in your answers to questions of Senator Fisher, your commitment to the nuclear triad, the importance of that deterrence, and specifically the ground-based strategic deterrent. As you know, North Dakota is home to about 150 of the Minuteman IIIs scheduled by the Air Force to be replaced as part of the modernization effort somewhere in the 2028 to 2035 time frame as they are assumed, or an analysis determined that they'd probably be aging out the legacy missiles about that time. But there are some that want to delay that think that further study is required. One of the things I've really appreciated that you've mentioned multiple times, and that is the importance of understanding the long game, being committed to a long-term plan, commitment to the NDS. Can you speak just a little further about the importance of that, specifically that one part of the triad, the ground-based strategic deterrent, and why sticking to the time frame is important?
The time frame is important because we do need to modernize the triad. It needs to be the two parts of deterrence are having a capability and the will to use it. The capability means that the triad, at least in this case, the ground-based strategic deterrent must be reliable, must be effective. We want it to be safe as well. And it needs to build in all those other mechanisms. It needs to be cyber protected, for example. So that is a reason to modernize it. And as I said, each leg of the triad provides different capabilities. In the case of our ground-based strategic deterrents, you have much quicker means of communication. They can reach targets much more quickly. And because they're at a fixed site, they are more accurate. So all those things are arguments in favor of having a ground-based strategic deterrent option.
Thank you. Another issue that you've raised a fair bit, and we've talked about the new domain of space as well as cyber. As you know, the Defense Authorization Act that came out of this committee and then the Senate includes standing up a Space Force. The House, similarly, they call it a Space Corps. But we have had some serious consideration and discussion and some disagreement on what the leadership ought to look like for that. And I know there have been multiple options that have been presented, proposals by the administration, DOD. The one we settled on was a version of the most recent, and that is something that would be similar to the Marine relationship to the Navy. I guess I'd be interested just in your thoughts about that and what we've settled on. The leadership model is where I focused a lot of my attention, is ensuring that there's a permanent seat with the Joint Chiefs, that the responsibility of the commanders to answer directly to the Secretary of the Air Force. But some of that's been in dispute, and I'd just be interested in your observations.
Well, I obviously support the budget proposal that we put forward with regard to standing up the Space Force. At this point in time, the House has a view on that, and the Senate has a view. And I think, obviously, if confirmed, I'd want to engage the committee as you approach conference, both committees, to come up with the right solution. But I think when you step back from it, you have to ask yourself, what are we trying to do? And I think what we're trying to do is recognize that space is no longer a place from which we support combat operations or from which we look down upon the world and see what's happening. It is now a war-fighting domain, not because we made it that way, but because the Russians and Chinese are making it that way. And so what you want to do as much as possible to make sure we are sufficiently robust in the space war-fighting domain is to ensure you have unity of command and unity of effort, people who are focused on that as a war-fighting thing going forward. You know, the closest analogy I have to this, and I think I may have mentioned to you, is when in 1947 they pulled the Army Air Corps out of the United States Army. It freed up our aviators to think about warfighting in the air domain and how you conduct warfare unencumbered by a hierarchy, if you will, that was focused on ground combat. And so that's how I think about this problem. I think we just got to realize that it is a new domain of warfare now, and it requires a different organizational construct and a different way of thinking about it.
I think your illustration's right on point, and I appreciate, again, your service and your good answers. I yield.
Yeah, and I appreciate that also, since I'm one of the few up here who was around at that time. I remember vividly. But I would like to announce that questions for the record, we're going to try to expedite this, and we're going to have a deadline on questions for the record that have to be submitted by close of business today. And we say that to the members, and I'd ask any staff that's representing someone here today to tell their member the same thing. Senator Manchin.
Secretary Esper, thank you very much for being here today and the service you've given to our country. Thank your family for being and attending with you. I've often told my children and my grandchildren, and we put ourselves forward to serve in public service. I said, you're going to hear a lot of things, and when you do, you're going to get upset about it, and it kind of bothers you and all that, but it's a very small price to pay when you think about the great opportunities in life we have, living in the greatest democracy and the freedoms that we have. That's a very small price to pay, so I hope you realize that this is part of this process. I'm sure there are people in the private sector that would like for all of us to sign a 4-year deal. No books, no speaking engagements, no income enhancement after we leave public service. I'm sure they're out there. So with that being said, thank you for your service and in your stellar career. I will want to get to the thing that you and I have talked about, and you were kind enough to come and we sat down. The defense industrial base has long been targeted for foreign espionage, as we know. Chinese are the greatest proliferators of that. And just to show the public a little bit, here is the Javelin, the United States FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missile, and it shows the H-12 Red Arrow anti-tank missile from the Chinese. Here we have the General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper UAV, and if you look below, you have the CH-4 Rainbow UAV from China. If you look also at Northrop Grumman MQ-8 Fire Scout Unmanned Helo, and look down below, Secretary, the Chinese SVU-200 Flying Tiger Unmanned Helo. And then at the top of the food chain, the Lockheed Martin F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, and you look at the Cheyenne J-31 fighter. Now, there's no way this could have been, absolutely no way any of this could have been accomplished in the record time that they did it if it wasn't for the espionage. So you and I spoke about this before, so I would ask you, how are you planning to hold those services in the entire food chain, right, not just at the top? And we've talked about this. How can we do this, sir, and hold everybody accountable? Because right now there's no repercussion whatsoever. If they've been stolen, espionage is happening at the lower food chain, which is going to be a subcontractor, a subcontractor to a subcontractor. Somebody at the top of the food chain has to be held responsible, so you might want to answer that.
Yes, sir. The Chinese are probably perpetrating the greatest theft of intellectual property in human history in terms of what they're doing, and directly with regard to our national security. I'm well aware of this. I said earlier when we talked about cyber that I think we were vulnerable. Defensively, we were nearly not as strong as our offensive, so we need to build it up. My time in private sector, one of the experiences I bring is that, you know, the bigger companies have the means to address cybersecurity. They're working pretty hard, and they're conscious of their supply chains. But when you work your way down at those chains, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth tier, they simply just don't have the means to protect themselves. And oftentimes, in my experience, again, in the private sector, and the committee had a hearing on this under Senator Levin many years ago, that's where the Chinese were getting in.
We know where they're getting in.
They were working their way in at the small tiers.
I think quickly, Mr. Secretary, if I could just ask you, would you be receptive to basically holding the primary contractor responsible for the entire food chain of the product they've been awarded?
I'd have to think about that, and not because I'm trying to dodge it, but because there are obviously legal restrictions on what you can require. But I do think we need to tackle it together, because I agree with you on the threat.
We're not going to stop it. Of everything I'm passing around here, that'll never be stopped unless we hold everyone accountable. And at the big boys at the top that have the money to do this, to protect, but also protect the opportunity for those people to be able to contract to them. The second thing, very quickly, I'll follow up with this.
Again, I just don't want to put a mandate on the small guy who can't afford to do something.
No, it's not going to be
Push
on
him
the
out of
small
business.
guy. I'm saying hold the top guy responsible.
Well, sometimes they interpret that as kind of then requiring.
Oh, they'll pass it down if they can. I understand that, but.
And I understand that, too.
That's where the market's got to balance itself out, but we've got to have protections built in.
Sure.
So I look forward to working with you. National Guard. We get so many experts, and when you look at basically what we've got 54 cyber teams in National Guard. There are National Guard space units in 7 states with 1,400 National Guard members conducting space duties. All this expertise, and sometimes there's still kind of a shun from our mainstream military, if you will, to part-time National Guard, which is not the National Guard we've known.
Right.
Tell me how you intend to strengthen that, if you can expedite that, and basically build off of that.
I agree,
Cost-saving
Senator.
measures.
I think it's a great asset. When I came into the Army 2 years ago, I was really impressed that we were building the teams at that time. These are very capable people that Monday through Friday are working for companies, they're doing IT, they're involved in the space, and I think we need to continue to go after them, recruit them, adapt our personnel management procedures to get them in and have them work for us on the weekends doing either offensive, defensive, preferably offensive cyber.
Yeah. Thank you, Secretary. I look forward to voting for you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
I want to thank Secretary and your family. Thank you for your dedicated years of service, and you're a highly qualified candidate. I'm very disappointed that Senator Warren would demonize you after your decades of service simply because you served in the private sector. There's a lot of us that have been in the private sector, and that doesn't take anything away from our ability to do our job. I guess she just needed a moment for a presidential campaign, but I believe you deserve to be confirmed, and I know you've done a great job as Secretary of Army, and I know you'll do a great job in this. As you know, as we talked about, one of my biggest concerns is Venezuela. We've got Maduro is clearly killing citizens. Kids like my grandkids, don't have food, water, medicine. They're dying constantly. I've been to the border. Many of us have. Russia's there, China's there, Iran's there, Hezbollah's there, ELN's there, ISIS is there, all the bad guys are there, Cuba's there. Xi and Putin are putting up with this and supporting it. And it's wrong. So my question for you is our country spent a fortune in time and money in the Middle East. And what the question is what's the status of our U.S. forces and their readiness in this hemisphere to not only deter, but to defeat any enemy that seeks to harm us? I think this is national security, us or our allies. And do our enemies even think we care about what's going on? Because if you look at the amount of troops we have in this hemisphere versus all over the world, you wouldn't think that they think we have any concern.
Senator, I think we discussed this at another meeting we had, but this is it's an important theater. Under the National Defense Strategy, it's identified as an economy of force, if you will. We do a number of things down there, training exercises with partners. Our special operations folks are down there. I think importantly, we also leverage other parts of the government, whether it's USAID and Department of State functions down there. And what's been very successful, and I actually participated this during one of my times at Fort Benning, Georgia, is we do a lot of IMET training where we bring officers up from those countries down there to do it. But to the broader point, you're right. We have an illegal Maduro regime down there that is killing its people, suppressing their rights. They've driven that country into the ground, and they are spreading that. The risk is that would spread throughout the region. And you're right. It has invited in all the spoilers who want to either enable the illegal Maduro regime or kind of poke a finger in our eye. And you named them all. And so it's something we need to pay attention to. And I think, and I know the Admiral down there, Admiral Fowler, is focused on this. And it's something that I'm going to continue to pay great attention to, as has the White House, by the way.
So what sort of, none of us want to go to war. We want Maduro out, and we want, freedom and democracy, right, not only there, but to Cuba, all these places. So what can the Department of Defense do that would put more pressure on Maduro to step aside?
Well, there are things to put pressure, but there are also other things we can do. I spoke earlier about the importance of our values and what we speak to. One of the things we need to highlight more is the fact, for example, that we got the U.S. naval ship Comfort down there. She's out in the waters off of off of eastern of South America, and just those type of engagements to show America's commitment without the heavy hand that sometimes we get accused of exercising in the region. You know, at one point when it looked like the regime may get turned over, we flew in humanitarian supplies down there to show our commitment. So there are things like that we could do. There's obviously in the cyber realm, there are things we can do. Whatever we take, and in some ways we need to take our cues from the State Department would lead on this, take our cues from our diplomats on the ground and find out what do they recommend, what role can we play to best kind of move that situation forward.
Right. Well, thanks for your decades of service, and I apologize you were demonized earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you, Dr. Esper.
Yes, sir.
As a part of my responsibility, I ask the following 2 questions of every single nominee who comes before any of the 5 committees on which I sit. So here are the questions. First, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
You have testified that you would resign if you were asked to do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. And certainly the country cannot afford to have a yes man leading the DOD. So I just want to ask you, there was a time when the president did not acknowledge the importance of NATO, and Secretary Mattis tried to convince him otherwise. Would you have taken the same position as Secretary Mattis?
Senator, if I understand your question, I have taken that position. I think I said, you know, my second day on the job as acting.
Yes, I know that. So, but this would be standing up to the president. That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, in terms of expressing the importance of NATO?
Yes.
Absolutely, and not just NATO, all of our allies and partners.
Another question. The president announced unilaterally getting out of Syria, and this is a move that General Mattis very much disagreed with. Would you have done what General Mattis did, not necessarily to resign, but to take the position that was not a wise decision on the part of the president?
I take the position that I've taken with everybody I've worked for, even members here in Congress, and that is I owe the principal, in this case the president, my honest, candid advice in terms of what I think is the right course forward.
Yes, and also to uphold the Constitution and the interests of our country.
That is the oath we swear. Yes, ma'am.
So you were asked earlier about your support for reviewing the dishonorable discharge of service people who had come back from deployment or during deployment with PTSD. And I think that recognition of the high incidence of PTSD and other illnesses, that is a good thing that you're acknowledging. Let me point to a group of people that I wanted to mention to you that maybe that would be, I would say, similar situated. There was a recent report by NPR about the plight of veterans who have fought for this country, but because of various, a lot of incidents of PTSD, et cetera, they have been deported. And these veterans joined the military believing that one of the benefits would be expedited citizenship. Expedited citizenship. For one thing, a lot of them don't even know that they actually have to apply for citizenship, and this is not automatically conferred to them because they have served. And apparently that is also an issue. So they are sent back, and we're talking about probably hundreds of former service members who have been deported in this way, and they go back to the countries of their birth that they know nothing about, having to leave, in instances, their children, et cetera. So can you make sure that the naturalization process for eligible service members is clarified so they all understand, because they are one of the inducements to serving the country that they know, that's only our country is the only one they know, that they actually have to apply, and they should not be under a mistaken impression that this is automatic.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, I obviously have a soft spot in my heart for anybody who serves, and anybody who serves and fights for the country should go to the front of the line.
So this is a group that obviously needs your help, and I don't know if this is a matter that have ever been brought to your attention, but no. I would want to have a commitment from you, just as you are very concerned about those veterans who are discharged dishonorably, to review those, that this is a group of veterans that you would want to help. And yes, so you're saying yes.
Yes, ma'am, I am. Just as you described it, absolutely.
And of course, the people who are doing the deporting would be Homeland Security. So would you pledge that you will not expend any DOD resources to help the Department of Homeland Security identify and deport these veterans?
No, in fact, ma'am, what I'd like to do is, if confirmed, is reach out to DHS regardless and just find out what's going on with this and kind of come back to you.
Yeah, I would like to have that. And one of the other things that the President has done is that he has eliminated a program called Parole in Place, which says that family members of those who are in service cannot be deported, and he's stopped that. And so I would like to have your commitment that you would advocate for the reinstatement of the Parole in Place program so that the service members' family members are not deported while he or she is in service to our country.
I'm not familiar with that program either, but you have my commitment to look into it for sure.
You've been asked a lot about, if I could just, one short question, a lot of discussion about the importance of alliances. And you noted that one of the first things you did as the Secretary of the Army was go to Brussels to indicate the importance of NATO. So I would like to ask for your commitment that one of the first things you would do, knowing the importance of the Indo-Pacific Command, the biggest physical AOR, that you would go as Secretary of Defense to visit Japan, South Korea, particularly, but that is something that General Mattis did when he became Secretary. Would you commit to that?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's too important. And by the way, I'll visit Indo-PACOM headquarters as well. I did that as Army Secretary. It was a fantastic trip.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Senator McSally is recognized. However, I want to make one comment since I'm going to ask Senator Ernst to chair the rest of the meeting. To apologize to you for what you had to be confronted with. It was unfair, and you handled it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Esper, it's good to see you again. Congratulations. Your nomination was tweeted out the day before you were supposed to come visit Arizona. And so if you're confirmed, I look forward to hosting you back in Arizona, not just for your mission related to your duties as a Secretary of the Army, but also Secretary of Defense. So I just wanted to extend that invitation.
Sometime in my life, I want to make it to Fort Huachuca.
Sometime in your life. All right, we'll do it soon. So thanks for that. I've appreciated working with you on many issues in the past. We only have, 4.5 minutes, so I'll just go into a few here. The first is I'm grateful for your partnership since I've been in the Senate, specifically on the issue of combating sexual assault. We've got some good initiatives in this year's defense bill to build on the past year's initiatives related to the investigation and the prosecution side of things, but we have more work to do on the prevention side and the education side and to eliminate this altogether. So I just want to get your commitment to continue to partner with me on this really important.
Absolutely, Senator. And just let me thank you for your courage and your leadership on this, and we are fully committed to implementing all the recommendations of the task force.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to talk about China. Do you agree China is our biggest long-term threat to our national security?
Right. I don't like to paint them as a threat right now, but certainly a strategic competitor.
Potential.
Could absolutely.
And there are many elements we could talk about, but one I want to talk about is in the area of 5G. And you touched on this at a recent NATO Defense Ministerial meeting, I think, related to communications network security. I'm particularly concerned about recent reports this spring. Specifically, there was a CNN story highlighting some rural wireless carriers in America being allowed to use Chinese technology on their cellular networks that are right near U.S. military installations, including facilities with ICBM silos. Again, the concern is surveillance and then also disruption or the potential for that. So I just want to get your thoughts on, are you aware of those reports and the danger of them being so close and the impacts of that, right. And what can we do in order to protect our assets and our bases from threats like this?
I have not heard that report. I'm not surprised. I don't believe in coincidence like that. I will tell you, last summer when I was visiting Fort Greely, where our missile base is, if you will, they told me how some Chinese tourists somehow wandered up upon our base up there. So look, the Chinese have a grand plan out there to collect data on us, whether it's a physical collection, whether it's collection over the internet, you name it. And we need to be aware of that.
Right, exactly. Just recently, Secretary of Commerce Ross announced restrictions on U.S. tech companies selling to Huawei would be relaxed, saying that the ban would only apply to products that pose a national security threat. How do you see DoD playing a part in deciding where that national security threat is and how we can combat it?
Yes, Senator. My understanding is that they would remain, Huawei would remain on the entities list. There would be a presumption of denial, of course, and that it would only be for non-national security items. So that's where I think the DoD needs to participate with Commerce, as we do in these fora, to make sure that clearly nothing has a dual capable national security nexus.
Great, thanks. And the last time I want to continue on again on another element of China's aggression and concerns in the South China Sea. Early this month, China launched several of its DF-26 missiles in the South China Sea, its most powerful anti-ship ballistic missile. Again, it's incredibly provocative, given the timing of it all, but increasing to show their aggression in the region. We do have some capabilities, of course, which we have related to combating that. But I just want to get your thoughts on their aggression in the South China Sea. This is just one of the last incidents, and the best way that we can, with our international partners, combat that.
Well, as I recall, a few years ago, the President of China made a commitment to our President not to militarize the South China Sea, and then they consequently went and militarized the South China Sea. So we should be concerned because it undermines the international rules-based order, certainly in terms of freedom of navigation, freedom of the seas. It affects commerce. They're undermining customary international law. So we need to be very aware of this, and we need to have a strategy to go after it.
Thanks. And again, we can't do by ourselves, right? So our leadership and our executing the national defense strategy, where we're having more resources dedicated to that region, working with allies and partnerships to stop this, is got to be the.
And we've exercised our rights under freedom of navigation operations, what we call FONOPS, and we've had participation too by our allies, and that's important. We need to. It's not just U.S. versus China; it should be the world versus China on these things where they're breaking the law.
Exactly. Thanks, Secretary Esper. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. I'm the last one here. But I wanted to stay because I want to go over some really important points that you and I had conversations about in our meeting. And so I want to go over again the importance of logistics infrastructure. As we're focused on great power competition, as outlined in the NDS, as we talked about this, our logistical tail needs to be robust enough to address our shifting priorities. Would you commit to me that if you're confirmed, you will pay closer attention to our logistical needs, to include funding for sea lift, airlift, and other aspects of our logistics infrastructure? It would also include here amphibious shipping for the Marine Corps.
Absolutely, Senator. And just to share with you for the broader audience, look, the Army gets to the fight through sea lift. 90% of its equipment goes by sea, and if it can't get there, it won't be in the fight, it won't be relevant. And I've had this conversation as Secretary of the Army with Secretary of the Navy, Spencer, and he agrees we need to modernize and build capacity into our sea lift. And then second, with regard to the Marines, absolutely, they need to have the requisite number of amphibs to do their missions. They're short now, and that's something that I'm committed to seeing through.
Thank you. I want to address the night courts that you conducted. We discussed this a little bit. The savings and recapitalization enabled reprogramming to unify the Army's efforts behind these priorities, and I congratulate you for that. If confirmed, will you carry out a similar rigorous defense-wide review or multiple service-specific reviews to focus on future game changers, which might include things like AI, hypersonics, or nuclear command and control? You've touched on this a little bit. But
absolutely. I mean, the Congress and the American people were very generous with what they give us for defense, and I think we can make better use of every single dollar, certainly before we come back asking for more.
Thank you. Again, I want to address, since I get the last word here, I guess, about the ongoing use of the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs. Right. The U.S. Constitution vests with Congress the sole and solemn responsibility to declare war. However, over the past several years, administrations from both parties have used the existing AUMF in a way that outstrips the intent of Congress and has, at best, dubious legal justifications. In a real-world example of current concern, do you believe that the 2001 AUMF or the 2002 AUMF provides the necessary legal authorization for us to use military force against Iran?
Not to conduct a war, Senator, as you and I discussed, but obviously the President has under Article 2 the right to respond if attacked. But no, not in terms of how you described it as we discussed, to conduct a war.
Right, but Article 2 is aside from the AUMF.
Right. As I said, if Iran were to attack us, our soldiers, we always have the right of self-defense and to execute those types of things.
But that's under Article 2.
That's right.
I'm speaking specifically of the 2001 and 2002 AUMF.
Right.
Will either one of those authorize you to
No, because 2001 2001 applies to terrorist groups and organizations, and that would not be the case here with regard to the country of Iran.
Thank you. Again, I want to touch a little bit on the issue of sexual assault and harassment. We've had civilian and military representatives from DOD come in for years swearing to take the problem seriously and affect real change. Disappointingly, estimated prevalence rates are rebounding. Will you commit to working on a major effort to reform our prevention efforts, not through changes regulation, but an actual cultural change that needs to happen?
Absolutely, Senator. This is absolutely intolerable that what we see is happening out there. It is the goal should be zero, and we need to continue to jump on this problem, take care of the survivors, the victims, and then also hold the perpetrators accountable. One of the things that I found coming into the job as Secretary of the Army that we weren't leveraging, which I think gets to what you were saying, is I don't think we've leveraged well enough in the past the culture of the Army and the chain of command that says leaders at every level, down to the squad leader level, get involved and take this task on and make sure they know their soldiers well enough and they prevent sexual assault and harassment before it begins, not deal with it after the fact.
Well, there's about a minute left. I want to give you an opportunity to address the issues and to, I would think, reaffirm your willingness to stand by the recommendations of your ethics committee and your ethics officers in how you would conduct yourself in terms of Raytheon.
Absolutely, Senator. Look, it's beyond just the laws and regulations and policies. I will always follow those, but it's the spirit of ethics. It's what you grew up with in the Army, what I grew up with in the Army, what Senator Ernst grew up in the Army, is the commitment to the nation, living an honorable life, and living ethically. That's what drives me. That's what drives me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your many, many years of service, and I look forward to your confirmation.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. I want you to see, Mr. Secretary, that it's the logisticians that are left cleaning up the battlefield here. So
I recall you were a logistician.
So, Secretary Esper, I do want to thank you very much for being here today and representing so well. And I want to thank your family as well for stepping up, because it does take an entire family unit to make these things work. I want to further extend my appreciation for the fact that you have not only served in the United States Armed Services as a member of the military, but the fact that you've also served in public service and in the private sector. And I think that makes you extraordinarily well-rounded and fit for the capacity that you have been nominated for. So thank you very much for that. I would like to build upon the sexual assault, sexual harassment issue that Senator Duckworth and Senator McSally have mentioned. Senator Hirono always mentions it as well. I have introduced a Military Special Victims Protection Act, and it is really placing additional command emphasis and training oversight on a full spectrum of sexual misconduct actions, as well as domestic violence. A number of those domestic violence issues have not been readily addressed, I've seen in the last several years. So I think there are a number of us that are really intent on making sure, as Senator Duckworth said, that we are changing the culture. We can't just be out there making hollow efforts on training or educate. We have to change the culture. And so I'll just give you a couple seconds maybe to further reiterate your stance on that.
No, again, there's no room in the Army for in the military for sexual assault or harassment of any type, bullying, you name it. And we got to continue to work on it and stamp it out. And it's not just a values issue. I mean, it's a readiness issue as well, because it undermines the cohesiveness of a unit. You tear down one person or many people. So we need to go after it aggressively. And I think, I'm not familiar with the legislation, but I think it's fair to say is how people conduct themselves at home is how they conduct themselves in the workplace eventually. You don't change personalities and behaviors in between the two. Eventually it comes out. So I think the more ways we can go after to address this problem and change the culture. One of the things we were looking at doing in the Army too is not just starting when they get to their first unit or even basic training. Can you work all the way back to when they come to the recruiting station and start signing paperwork to make sure they know up front that we're going to hold you to a higher standard, you're going to live the Army values, and you're going to treat everybody with dignity and respect. Start the training, the inculcation, the development of those values then from literally day one, and continue that training and education throughout the course of their career in the service.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I know a number of us look forward to working with you on that issue. We've talked a lot about some of the major players, our near-peer adversaries, as we have focused very much on the National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy, of course, outlined 3 main lines of effort: the readiness, which we have addressed in a number of ways, readiness and lethality, building up of alliances, and thank you very much for your commitment to work in a whole-of-government approach and working with our allies on that. And then as well, our modernization of our forces and our platforms and equipment. If confirmed, would you have anything additional that you would like to see we focus on as a line of effort?
As I said in my opening remarks, I clearly support all 3 lines of effort under the National Defense Strategy. But again, what's personal to me, what I've lived through, what my wife lived through, was taking care of our families. Families are critical to readiness. You can't ask a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine to go out and deploy and be worried about what's happening at home. We can do better. We always got to strive to do better. But that would be something that I'd want to pull up with me and make sure I emphasize during my tenure, if confirmed.
No, absolutely, and I very much appreciate that, and we have heard the testimony from a number of those that serve on this committee. They've witnessed you and your family visiting some of the readiness centers that we have and addressing concerns of our military families, housing first and foremost. You and I have had many discussions about family members and service, and so thank you for that as well. You know, serving as a former soldier and as a spouse of a young enlisted soldier, just understanding some of the challenges that our families face when they are far from home, and the need to support those families is very, very clear to all of us. We hope that we can project that to the broader United States as well. But thank you for that great commitment. You answered a number of the questions I think that I had earlier in the committee hearing. I would remind those that are here, for your members, that questions for the record must be submitted by close of business tonight. We will go ahead and close this hearing, but again, I want to extend my gratitude to you, Secretary Esper, for stepping up during a very challenging time as we face friends and adversaries all around this globe. So with that, I will give you 10 seconds to close out your statement.
Just thank you for your time, for the committee's time, for expediting this consideration of this. It's a calling. I feel it's a privilege for me to have this opportunity. So again, my vow is I will not let you down in this regard. So thank you very much.
And I believe that to be true. I look forward to supporting your nomination. Thank you very much. This closes today's hearing.
Thank you.
Saudi Arabia, shooting women, killing children. You're so